Hi guys, I'm Tyler,
Hi, my name is Marwa.
and we're going to talk today about how to use engineering to improve education to further improve communities. So, why education is important? Just to give you guys some context on why we decided to do this presentation and specifically focus on this topic, we're referring to this quote from UNESCO. Education is a process of facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, beliefs, and habits. And as the quote kind of continues to talk about, quality education is really important to the development of any community or to the development of infrastructure, equipment, and resources for a community to better itself. So, we know that enrollment in primary education in developing countries has increased massively in the past few years, reaching upwards of 91% right now, as reported by UNESCO. But this doesn't take into account issues of attendance, issues of unreported gaps in education in certain areas, etc.
Quality education is used also by UNESCO as a metric for what is sustainable development. So UNESCO has 17 categories that define what leads to sustainable development goals and what can help improve communities, especially when it is an NGO or nonprofit organization working in a separate community. They define education and quality education as one of those factors, but it's also important to recognize the intersectionality of how improving education can likewise improve all of the other, or not all, but most of the other categories that they identify. So in order to improve education, sometimes you have to install water access systems, you install new classrooms, infrastructure, all of that helps poverty, that helps sanitation, that helps gender equality, particularly for female students who have to miss school because of like their menstrual cycle. So having that hygiene and implementing infrastructure that helps education can simultaneously help develop these other goals. So, issues posing educational barriers. Borrowing from the case of Mukutani, one of Harvard chapters at Engineers.Border, one of Harvard chapter's old projects, one of the issues was that female students were missing school very often due to hygiene access in the school being very limited. So, if they're on their menstrual cycle, they don't feel comfortable or they don't have the means to access that hygiene. There's also low teacher retention rate, and that could be explained by many things, but one of the issues that our team identified at that time was that there was a very long transportation time for teachers from their home to the school, and any sort of obstacle during that transportation time meant that teachers would have to miss the entire class. Young kids also spend a lot of time collecting water, and when there isn't accessible water, there's water spread diseases, and yeah, and lack of proper classrooms.
Yeah, and so just to go a little bit more deeper into the context of why education relief is so important, particularly in partner countries that we have worked with, such as Kenya, such as Tanzania, perhaps even the Dominican Republic, although most of our projects there have been focused specifically on water access, is sort of just the idea of how much money is necessary to provide educational relief. So borrowing from UNICEF again, particularly their data on Kenya, it was determined that in 2019, in order to provide quality education to 59,000 school-aged children, they would have to dedicate 1.7 million, which is approximately 30% of this 5.5 million figure you see in the left, in order to make sure that these children had access to education. To give you a little bit more context, this 1.7 million divided by 59,000 is roughly only $30 a day. So that sort of speaks to how in many developing countries, how little there needs to be given per person in order to develop these education quality. But it also sort of speaks to the vast differences between what we perceive as necessary for quality education and what is necessary to help people, such as in the communities we've worked with, achieve these necessary goals.
Yeah. For the scope of our particular presentation, we've identified 5 separate infrastructural items that can help improve education. Some of them might seem a little bit irrelevant to education, but we'll explain throughout the presentation how each one of these things can actually help students access their schools. So the first thing we're going to talk about is water access. Implementing things like wells, rainwater catchment, any sort of sustainable, healthy, accessible water source can help students because it saves time on collecting water, it makes sure they have proper health. which leads to our sanitation and hygiene. So having latrines or tippy taps or other areas for hygiene, especially for the women that we mentioned earlier, can make sure that female students don't have to miss school and students don't get illnesses due to lack of cleaning facilities. Another one we're going to talk about is school buildings and infrastructure. Teachers' housing is the most obvious option. Teachers' housing means that teachers have a space to stay and they don't have to worry about transportation. And study spaces, that piece of infrastructure, if students don't have a clean, reliable place to study, it becomes harder to maintain their academics. Another one is classrooms. So new classrooms, repairing old classrooms, because that's where the education takes place, and it's really important to have a positive environment that is reliable, again, for education. And the final one, which is often looked over, is electricity access. So solar panels, grid-tied power can help provide the small things that we take for granted, like fans or small mobile devices or projectors or like watching educational YouTube videos. All of these small tools makes that available to those communities.
Yeah, so going a little bit more in depth, the first major area that we want to focus on as a means to improve education is water access, particularly installing rainwater wells and catchment, as Marwah mentioned. So, just sort of reading this quote at the top of the slide, in rural Africa, 19% of women spend more than 1 hour on each trip to fetch water. Unsafe water, inadequate sanitation, and poor hygiene habits play a major role in Africa's high child mortality rate. Not only that, the lack of water, in many ways, because of the expectation that girls are going to go need to fetch water and take time out of their school day, out of their general day to do it, is very inhibitive to young women being able to attend school. And so for that reason, providing clean water access, both for both for boys and girls, and for girls specifically, is so important for improving education. So clean water access, just sort of looking at the flow chart we've created, reduces time collecting water, which means there's better student attendance, particularly for females, and increased student participation. There's also better hygiene access and reduced waterborne diseases. Obviously, any health inhibitor that is preventing students from being able to function properly during the day is going to prevent them from being able to access their education effectively. And so making sure that we have water access to reduce waterborne diseases is necessary for improving the health and nutrition of students and, again, increasing their attendance. So looking at this slide, we have a basic sort of structure on the left showing the how a typical rainwater catchment system might look. At the top, you notice that you use the roof in order to collect water. On the left, you can see that there's a filter. This probably refers to the first flush filter, which uses to get out the first amount of water that is collected by the structure. And then it feeds into a tank through the gutters, which allows us to store water right by the school, make it very easy to access. Usually these tanks have their own faucets or own taps just to make sure you can access the water right there. On the right, we have a picture of our own member of the former Mukatani Schoolhouse Project team, Daniel Gatega, doing a handstand on top of the slab on which one of the water storage tanks was constructed for the Mukatani rainwater catchment system.
Yes. Another option that we have is for sanitation, so building latrines in particular. Having sanitation hygiene access was identified by UNICEF as one of the very important things to have in order to promote education. So they say women without toilets are forced to defecate in the open, risking their dignity and personal safety. Education suffers too. More than half of all girls who drop out of primary school do so for lack of separate toilets and easy access to safe water. So this very small item, like a latrine, makes the biggest difference for over half of the girls who drop out of primary school. It gives them, as we mentioned before, a safe, accessible place to handle their menstrual hygiene. So they don't have to miss school anymore. They feel more comfortable at school. And it's improved health and hygiene for all students, which means that there's less waterborne illnesses, less diseases spread, which means fewer absences and fewer health problems. On the right, you can see on the top right are members of the EWB-USA Montana State University chapter in front of a newly built latrine in Kenya. And the model follows that similarly of the latrine diagram right below. So the latrine diagram in this case has a seat and a slab and a shelter. There's a drop pipe that takes it over to an offset storage pit. And you can see that there are a few mechanisms to keep the latrine ventilated. So in this case, the airflow ventilation is coming out from the hole that we saw on the top of the other latrine. And in this case, they have a vent pipe. So there are many ways to keep it sanitary, and to keep the air moving. The other really important thing that we mentioned is overlooked very often is providing electricity access. So the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs says that roughly 4 out of every 5 primary and secondary schools in African countries surveyed lacked access to electricity. This may not seem like a big issue, except for the fact that this means that lighting and access to information is essential for improvements in staff retention and student completion and graduation rates. So to have power for electronic devices means you have access to light. You're able to perform schoolwork at night. Teachers can also do work at night if they please. If there's electronic devices, it makes the school more appealing, which means greater retention rates, particularly for those teachers who want to use any sort of tools that require electricity to supplement the educational curriculum that they provide. That also means that school is more appealing to the students. You have greater access to advanced curriculum and academic materials, which means that they have a greater curriculum.
And sort of focusing on this for a second, a reason that we kind of wanted to bring up electricity and focus on it for a little bit longer than the other topics is how important electricity is from the perspective that too often we focus on pedagogy as the means to improve education, when in reality, for a lot of places, such as for 90 million children in sub-Saharan Africa, it's lack of electricity, which is the biggest barrier to education. This means no projectors, no presentations, no fans, no air conditioning, neither evening classes, computers. These things that are so integral to our educational quality in the United States are really lacking in a lot of these places. And so providing access to electricity is so important. Another consequence of energy poverty, which we kind of talked about in the last slide, but just go into a little bit more, is that it discourages teachers from working in areas without access to electricity. There's not really anything as appealing for a lot of these teachers, and so as a consequence, they don't really want to live in communities that lack electricity, they don't want to teach in schools that lack electricity, and so providing electricity is great for both increasing student interest in the school and increasing teacher interest.
So here's a solar panel. This is implemented on the left by the University of Nebraska Madagascar program. So this is Henry Dorley Zoo, which provides educational supplements to the nearby communities. A quick, very, very brief diagram on solar panels. You have the photons going through the solar panel. It's converted into DC electricity, and sometimes you have a battery that can store that electricity, or it goes straight to the ports.
Yeah, so moving into something that's probably a little bit more straightforward in how it applies to education and how it can improve educational space is classrooms. For a lot of communities that lack classrooms, this is sort of the baseline necessity that the community will often need in order to provide a safe and reliable educational space to its students. And what providing this space does is provide a better environment for teachers to teach and an environment for students to learn. This means there's going to be greater teacher retention rates. Teachers are going to feel more comfortable in class, they're going to be eager to teach, and the students are going to have better attendance and feel more eager and safe coming to school because they know there's a place which provides stability and continuity to their education. Moreover, teacher housing is also very integral to educational quality in a lot of communities. Teacher housing might be something we don't really think about as much because in the United States, teachers usually receive pretty good pay, don't really have to worry about where they're living because commuting in the United States is pretty easy sometimes, and we don't really think about how important it can be for teachers to live within a community. So in the case of Moulton, which we know of, as Marwah mentioned earlier, a big inhibitor for teachers was that a lot of teachers did not live in the community. In fact, I think before we installed teacher housing, none of them did. And so all of them had to commute at the minimum 40 minutes every day, usually on motorcycles, mopeds, related transportation means. And as a consequence, if there was ever any issue barring sort of access to the community, be it a weather issue, political issue, anything like that, teachers oftentimes wouldn't come. And teachers not showing up is a huge barrier to education. And so providing teacher housing in the community is so important for making sure that teachers are constantly present. They don't need to commute to the community. They're more likely to be retained year to year, providing educational stability, no volatile teacher turnover, etc. And then just sort of borrowing again from our case of Moulton, on the left is an image of the teacher housing that we built in accordance with Tanzanian national standards mid-construction. And then on the right we have members of the community and of our EWB team working together outside of the teacher housing on a different project, but still kind of just showing a little bit of the finished product, how it became a centerpiece for the community.
So some conclusions. Basically what we've seen here is that the educational disparities facing our communities do not just have to be resolved through directly educational related means. We can use engineering design that target larger social issues that help education. So we talked about the gender disparities and how providing small pieces of infrastructure can help reduce the gender gap between education for women and men. And then there are water supply problems that prevent students from going to class, like if they have to go collect water or they have chores and oftentimes they miss class for that, or if there's waterborne illnesses, then providing something as simple as a well or a safe, accessible source of water can help limit all of those factors and make sure that more students are attending class. Of course, with greater education, you're promoting economic growth and you're reducing poverty. You're giving more people opportunity to move forward in higher education-required jobs. And with clean and affordable energy, that can, of course, mean that you have better curriculum, but also can later lead to the community developing other electrical access, all of which intertwines to help fight systematic inequality.
Spear. We really enjoyed giving you guys this presentation and would love if you guys reached out to us at any point with any questions. They're really great options for looking a little bit deeper into education reform in the